What's up, everybody? I hope you're all having a great week. Welcome back to the channel for another episode of the Ask Me Anything series. As always, I want to give a huge thank you to every single one of you who took the time to go and leave a question on the post. Obviously, I can't feature all of them, but just know I read every single comment on those posts, and I appreciate all of you guys. So let's get things started with the first question of today's episode. This one comes from M4L Vinny, who says, could the Hurricanes be like last year's Avalanche, finally breaking out of the second round and winning it all? I actually like that comparison. I'm really high on the Hurricanes heading into this season. Obviously, they've been one of the better regular season teams in the league for years now. They're a perennial playoff team, but they just haven't been able to get over that hump in the playoffs. In my video yesterday, where I ranked every team heading into this upcoming season, go check that out if you haven't already, but I actually ranked the Carolina Hurricanes as Stanley Cup contenders along with teams like the Lightning and the Avalanche and the Rangers. I really believe Carolina had one of the more underrated off seasons. I love the addition of Max Pacioretty, especially considering they basically got him for free. It's unfortunate that he's going to miss so much time, but he's going to be there for the playoffs. I've said it once, I'll say it again. I love the addition of Brent Burns, especially now that he's not going to have to play such a big role and carry so much of the load and, be one of the biggest minute eaters in the league. I also really like the depth additions of Paul Stastny and Ondrej Kase. I have high hopes for the Hurricanes heading into the season. I expect them to be in the hunt for the President's Trophy, and I definitely think this team has the potential to make it out of the Eastern Conference and compete for the Stanley Cup. The next question we have comes from Machine Gun C13, who says, if you could make an NHL team to be implemented into the league next year, where would you put them and what would you call them? I would definitely want to make it a Canadian team because of the 32 teams in the NHL, only 7 are Canadian teams, so I would want it to be a Canadian team. Me being from Halifax, Nova Scotia, I would love it to be in Halifax, but I don't really think that would make much sense for the league. I don't know if there'd be a big enough market for an NHL team here. I'd definitely be a fan of the Quebec Nordiques coming back, but obviously that isn't an original idea. Outside of Canada, though, I actually kind of think an NHL team in Houston would work. The next question we have comes from Zach, who says, do you think there's any chance that the Panthers end the season as either just a wild card or miss the playoffs entirely? I would be genuinely shocked if the Florida Panthers fail to make the playoffs. I don't want to say it's impossible because anything could happen in the NHL. Their goaltending could be miserable for a whole year. They could have significant injuries, all that kind of stuff, but I would say there's like a 99% chance they make the playoffs. A wild card team, though, maybe, but then you have to think which team would finish ahead of them in the Atlantic Division. Like, I'm dead set on the top 3 in the Atlantic being some combination of Tampa, Florida, and Toronto. The only team that I feel like could maybe potentially pass over Florida is the Boston Bruins, but obviously they have some pretty significant injuries to their most important players to start the season, so I can't really see that happening. Moving along now, this question comes from Jalen, who says, what youngish players this upcoming season have the most to prove? For example, I think a guy like Eli Tolvanen has a lot to prove just because he has the potential to be a very good top 6 forward, but he just hasn't been able to put it all together. And also, thank you for the kind words. One player that I feel like has a lot to prove, and I'm not just saying this because I'm a Red Wings fan, Filip Zadina. He just signed a new 3-year extension the other day. He hasn't lived up to the billing of being a 6th overall pick just yet, and I don't really ever expect him to. The last 2 seasons for him have been very underwhelming. He's shown flashes, but the finishing ability just isn't there at the NHL level, it seems. I see a lot of Red Wings fans saying, oh, it's just bad luck, the goals are going to start to come for Filip Zadina, but at what point does it stop being about luck and you actually have to start to think that maybe Filip Zadina is just a bad finisher at this level? So I definitely feel like Zadina has a lot to prove this upcoming season, especially if he wants to be a part of the Red Wings core moving forward, and also the opportunity for him is going to be there no matter if he's on line 1, 2, or 3. He's going to be playing with some decent line mates. There's going to be no more of him getting stuck with Franz Nielsen, Luke Glendening, Darren Helm, and the likes of those guys like he was often paired with in the first couple years of his career. Not to mention he's also going to be getting a fresh start under a brand new head coach. I don't want to call it a make it or break it year for Zadina, but it's definitely a huge year for him, and I feel like he does have a lot to prove. Next up, we have a question from Herman the German Merman, who says, who will get more points this season, Wright or Slavkovsky? Love the vids. Thank you for the support. This is actually a really tough question. It's kind of hard to project things like these for rookies because there's actually no guarantee that either of these guys make their respective NHL teams this year. I think it's likely that they will, but anything can happen. I think I'm going to go with Slavkovsky just because I feel like he's likely to play a bigger role with the Canadiens than Wright is with Seattle, at least in their first seasons. Next up, we have a question from Elliot, who says, who will be the Montreal Canadiens' next captain? I feel like this one kind of all comes down to if they want to go the route of giving it to a veteran. I think a guy like Brendan Gallagher would be a great captain, or do they want to go the route of giving it to one of their young stars who's likely going to be there for the next decade plus? Somebody like Nick Suzuki, I feel like would be a prime candidate for that, and I also think Suzuki would make a great captain. He's already locked up on a long long-term deal. So for me, those are definitely the two prime candidates to be the next captain of the Canadiens, Suzuki or Brendan Gallagher. I would be surprised if it's anybody else, to be honest. Moving on now, the next question we have comes from Mingus Clark, who says, which team do you think most needs to revert back to their old jerseys? Just off the top of my head, a team that comes to mind is definitely the Florida Panthers. I like the jerseys they had back in like 2012 and 2013 a lot better than what they're wearing now, and I think the logo especially is the biggest thing for me. I think the logo they used to have back in the early 2010s is much better than the one they have now. I don't even think it's close. Like, the reverse retro jersey the Panthers had was one of my favorites in the league by far. Moving on now to the next question. This one comes from Welcome to Detroit, who says, thoughts on the Tage Thompson deal? So if you didn't know, Tage Thompson got quite the hefty contract extension from the Buffalo Sabres the other day. 7 years, $50 million total, works out to be an AAV of about $7.14 million. Now, Tage Thompson is actually still under contract on his previous deal for this upcoming season, so his extension won't kick in till 2023-24. Initial reaction though, that's a lot of money for a guy whose career high prior to this past season was 14 points. Like, sure, Tage Thompson was one of the biggest breakout stars from this past season, lethal goal scorer, has a very deceptive shot, very quick release. Obviously, if Tage Thompson can continue that production throughout this contract to be a perennial 30-35 plus goal scorer, then of course this is a fine contract. But of course the big question is, can he continue that production, or was that season from Tage Thompson just a flash in the pan? For me personally, I think it's going to be somewhere in between. I don't see Tage Thompson as the caliber of player who's going to be, pushing 40 goals every season, but I definitely think this is a guy who you should be able to lock in for 20-25 goals at the very least. In the end, I do feel like this contract is going to end up being a little bit of an overpay for Tage Thompson, but I don't expect it to be anything close to like one of the worst deals in the league or anything like that. Moving along, next up, this question comes from San Jose Shark 88, who says, do you think that Yzerman will regret taking Cosa over Wallstedt? Unfortunately, I am going to go with yes on this one. I feel like right now Wallstedt is far and away the better goaltending prospect than Sebastian Cosa is. Wallstedt looks like he's a lot closer to being NHL ready than Sebastian Cosa, but that's not to say Sebastian Cosa is never going to be an NHL caliber goaltender. Goaltenders take a long time to develop in most cases. You never know, anything can happen, but I definitely feel like if given a redo there, Steve Yzerman probably takes Jesper Wallstedt over Cosa for sure. Next up, this question comes from Hockey Guy 1988. Will you be going to World Juniors in Halifax this year? I'm definitely planning on catching a couple games. I'm super excited for that. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. My plan as of right now is to maybe catch 1 or 2 games in the round robin and then try to get a ticket for the gold medal game that is hopefully involving Team Canada. That would kind of suck if it didn't. Moving on now, the next question we have comes from Nicholas, who says, even though the Colorado Avalanche lost 2/3 of their second line and their starting goaltender, Kadri Burakovsky-Kemper, do you still see them as a cup contender? Without a doubt, I still see the Avs as cup contenders. I honestly feel like they should still probably be the favorite for the Stanley Cup heading into this season. Sure, it's a downgrade going from Darcy Kemper to Georgiev, but I think Georgiev and Francouz can be a more than capable tandem, especially playing behind, in my opinion, the best blue line in the league, or at the very worst, the second best blue line in the league. And as far as Kadri and Burakovsky goes, I definitely think they're going to miss Nazem Kadri. I mean, right now, who's their second line center? JT Compher. Like, that's a pretty significant downgrade. I don't think they're going to miss Burakovsky all that much, though. I expect Alex Newhook to have a really big sophomore season. And honestly, I kind of expect Joe Sakic to have an ace up his sleeve here and do something to maybe bolster that top 6 a little bit. I threw the idea of Patrick Kane to Colorado. Maybe that happens, who knows? And now for the final question of today's episode. This one comes from Hugh Barker, who says, whilst the Eastern Conference playoff picture will likely be more competitive than it was last year, do you still see the same final 8 teams, or will we see something different? I hate to say this because I want to see something different, but I kind of get the feeling that in the end, it is going to be the same 8 teams that make it. I feel like it all really just comes down to Boston, how they fare without Marchand, McAvoy, and Grzelcyk for the first couple months of the season. How Bergeron and David Krejci look. Obviously, that core is getting a lot older. So yeah, I really feel like it all just comes down to Boston. If a team like Ottawa or Detroit can pass over Boston, or if a team like Columbus can make it in a wildcard spot over the Bruins, and maybe we see 5 teams from the Metro make it and only 3 from the Atlantic. But that is going to wrap up today's episode of the Ask Me Anything series. As always, huge thank you to every single one of you who participated. If you enjoyed this video and you want to see another one next week, be sure to leave it a like. That is the best way to show your support. And most importantly, if this was your first time checking out the channel and you want more NHL content just like this, be sure to hit that subscribe button, and I'll talk to you all soon.